So now we're going to have a little interlude right now. Where's Erika? We're going to bring Erika T. Wurth up to... bring her up in a second. I'm almost finished with her novel, Crazy Horse's Girlfriend, which Curbside Publishing put out in 2014. We just had she'll be on the podcast, so you can find the Downtown Writer Jam podcast. It'll be up Friday. Had a lovely conversation. She teaches creative writing at Western Illinois University and has been a guest writer at the Institute of American Indian Arts. She's also spent the last 3 months going everywhere in the country promoting this book. So she is here in physical space, but sort of mentally, I think, has been traveling for 3 months and is in that space. And anybody who's ever done that, who's written a book and who's gone out, knows exactly the space that she's in. This is my favorite part. Growing up, all she wanted to do was read dragon books underneath the display case to hide from whoever wanted to beat her up. Right? This is like unhappy shit. This is now a theme. She was sure she would write horror fantasy, but for some reason she wrote realistic fiction, no dragons, but she misses the dragon sometimes. So her novel is Crazy Horse's Girlfriend, which you can buy now, I know, because I have it on my Kindle. And we're going to bring her up, and she's going to do a little bit of anecdotal storytelling.
Okay.
Which I've only gotten to say a couple times. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you to the Curbside people for coming with us. It's always neat to see Catherine and Naomi. I'm like, the girls are here, you know. And I get to read to Susan Lanier, who's like, I adore so much, and you guys should all buy her book, The Game We Play. And thank you, Brian, for putting this together.
Close,
and
Brian.
Did I say Brian?
You did.
I'm fucking tired.
3 months on the road.
Thank you, Mark, for being on The Simpsons. I love that show. And thank you to Indy Reads Books, because this place is beautiful. So, Curbside took my book, Crazy Horse's Girlfriend, and, you know, essentially it's about this girl named Marguerite who complains and complains that everyone in her town is a drug dealer and gets pregnant. And then you find out, like, she's a drug dealer, and then she gets pregnant. So, so basically, it's essentially like, you know, about this town where I was bused to school. I grew up right outside of Denver, in between two towns, and Denver is a place of, like, real cultural mix, where, you know, Native Americans of every tribe, Latinos, white people, everybody's there. And where I grew up, though, the unifying factor was the mullet. There was the classic, there was the Indian mullet, the Mexi mullet, and the classic white mullet. And I didn't have a mullet, so I wasn't particularly popular, hence the dragon books. And I would, you know, sit under the display case and read my dragon books. And I remember, though, there was a guy, you know how, like, in high school, how there are, like, popular people and people who want to be popular, and, like, other guys, and then, like, band geeks, and then, like, 3 or 4 untouchables. So I was one of the untouchables. And there was a guy who was mentally handicapped, and his name was Jamie, and he would ask, like, everybody out, and including people who were, like, insanely, frighteningly, inappropriately young. And poor Jamie, he works in Safeway now, he's okay. And, you know, he still sees me, and I could tell he's like, "Oh, you go," and I'm like, "Oh, I gotta go," you know. And then there was me, and then there was a dude named Chipper Putfark. And his name was Chipper Putfark, and that was the first thing, which I don't really know how parents are like, hey dudes, you know what, like, our last name's Putfark, how can we make this horrible? But he's Charles now. I saw him on MySpace, and he wears like a blazer, and his name's Charles, so he's okay too. But yeah, he used to try to make friends with me, and I'd be like, no fucking way. I mean, he was one of those guys who's like, I didn't know this, but white people have a word for it. I found out later what it is. It's ginger. It means you're so white that you are white with red hair and red freckles. And also, like,
yeah, thanks, appreciate it.
I found out, you know, I'm Native American, and I tell you what, I know white girls, you're not always loving the redhead men. Give them to me. So, a Chipper, he was that. And then also, it was like the white people were like, I'm white, but that's just too white, you know? And then, like, there might be like 2 people who like get that joke, but It was worth it anyway. So basically, and then Chipper also belonged to some religion, like he couldn't do the holidays. And then also he smelled like pee, but I don't know, it was like, was it human pee or cat pee? I'm not sure which one of the peas it was, poor Chipper. And it wasn't his fault, he probably had one of those crazy homes like full of cats and humans, like coming out of every corner, just pooping out of every corner. So he used to always try to make friends with me, because he was lonely and I understood, so was I, but I had the books. And I'd be like, no way, dude, we get beat up enough alone. If we hang out, we'll die. We'll die, Chipper. And Chipper butt fark. And so, but it, so I was one of the untouchables. And, my friend Misty, who's like this other native, like I'm Native American, so like Misty was like this Native American chick, like she was just tough. She's like what I call 5x5, just like, a square of Indian, And so she would see me under the display case, and she'd be like, ugh. And I just obeyed her because, I'm just used to, as a Native woman, like being surrounded by domineering women, I obey. Okay, don't kill me. And so, like, I was like, okay. And then she, like, cleared a space for me at the nerds table. I think she was ashamed for the race, I guess. So I got that. But it's really actually no surprise that I'm a weirdo. And I was, one of the untouchables because my family, they're a combination of tribes. Long story short, some of which were removed into Oklahoma, right? And forcibly, and then they came down to Texas for work. And they just kept marrying other Indians. They kept marrying in, the fools. And, so like we ended up being these like super, city crazy Indians, like whorehouse owners and gamblers and like fucking horse stealers and all that kind of thing. And so, my grandmother was a really interesting lady. She grew up with her grandmother because her mother essentially abandoned her. And her grandmother was like super traditional, but also like a whorehouse owner, really interesting lady. And she had cancer, and she went to she was Chickasaw, her husband was Apache, one of them. And so she went into Mexico where all of his relatives were living in these boxcars in the mountains. And they did a ceremony, and she went into remission, right? So it's just kind of this amazing shit, but at the same time, she had a shotgun with her at all times, spoke like 5 Indian languages. She was an interesting lady. So she had an arranged marriage, and she didn't like the guy because he was old mainly, so she stripped a bullet and melted it and poured it in his ear, and he died. He was a dead man. And so even though she'd had an arranged marriage that had resulted in this, she decided to do an arranged marriage for my grandmother, who she raised. So my grandmother was about 14 when this basically non-traditional but traditional arranged marriage was made, and the guy was just a fucktard. He, he was like, he beat her, he gave her syphilis, he was a fucktard. When she was pregnant, she was sitting on the porch, and he walked up the steps and just kicked her, just for the fuck of it. He was a fucktard, exactly. And fucktards always deserve a hiss. And so thank you. And so she ended up at the hospital, pregnant with her first child at maybe 15 at this point. And she decided to leave him, and she ended up with my mom's dad. But they said, the baby's going to die. It's probably going to be stillborn. You just should leave it here. And my grandma was like, no, take it home. And she put some sort of Indian medicine on his head, and he survived. But sadly, my Uncle Jack was never going to have the maturity level of, say, anything past a 14-year-old. And so he, and keep in mind they're all in Texas, and so my mom's family. So growing up, he had this weird language. His name was Uncle Jack, and he decided to have this weird language called Jackanese. And it was mainly based off of, I think, TV commercials from the 70s. So if he didn't know what to say, he'd be like, and so all my life, it would be weird Jackanese all the time. And one time he was like, would you like a hot toddy? And I'm 18, so I'm like, yes, I would. And I just about died. I'm like, thanks. And I'm like, and he's like, it's a good one. And then one time I was clipping my nails, and he's like, what do you do? I'm like, what the fuck? And he takes them, and he moves a couch cushion and puts them in. There's a collection, and I'm like, the fuck? So I tell this other native this though, and they're like, oh yeah, that's medicine. That's traditional, some kind of medicine. I'm like, oh, I don't even want to know. So I don't even want to know what's wrong with me because of my nail, pardon me, is a nail voodoo collection. So anyway, Uncle Jack, eventually though, he also ended up all right because he ended up on a council, like a local council. And all I could think about was, you know, like them being like, Councilman Temple, do you have anything to add? And him being like, Congoline. So, I'm not, as you can see, I'm not particularly surprised that I ended up being kind of a fucking dork and writing weird books. Thank you.